According to Dr. Dickson Polmmier, it may be that we need that parking lot to be adjacent to a fantastic skyscraper that's going to hold a brand new farm. In his new book, The Vertical Farm, Dr. Dickson Polmmier talks about feeding the world in the 21st century. He's going to be signing his book at the Westport Library on Tuesday, March 15th at 7:30 p.m. in the McManus Room. And I got a peek at it. It's right here, and I got to read it. And I will tell you that Dr. Polmmier is a very distinguished person. He is a MacArthur Genius Fellow, and he spent 38 years as a professor of microbiology and public health and environmental health sciences at Columbia, where he won the Best Teacher Award 6 times. He's had a ton of other accolades and awards, and it's a real pleasure and a privilege. Welcome, Dr. Polmmier, to the Lisa Wexler Show today.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's really exciting for me because I love to talk to geniuses. You know, I'm figuring maybe by osmosis I can get a couple of bits of DNA back into my system. So,
well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I actually have not been elected to the MacArthur Geniuses yet. That was Majora Carter, I'm afraid you read on the cover.
Oh, I read it wrong. You see? And that's my point. Once again, you make my point. Okay, so I'm not too bright, but you know what? Maybe after this book and the research and all the stuff, you never know. You know what? I'll nominate you. There you go. So,
thank you very much.
Well, you're a great teacher, and that's a great thing.
Well, I like to think I am because I've had great classes. Actually, they inspire me.
Well, and you know what? It's interesting. I was just telling Julia, our board op, the same thing. I'm on Ustream right now so that people are watching the show on a live video feed called ustream.com as well as listening on the radio. And I watch the chat. I am learning so much from the audience that is chatting about the topics that I'm talking about on the radio. I feel like I'm learning more than you know what I mean? I'm getting more than I'm giving. It's fantastic.
Sure. No, that's exactly what teaching is all about.
So let me ask you something, because in your book, and you sort of deal with it and dismiss it in one sort of fell swoop. You assume that climate change is happening, it's occurring. You don't feel the need to explain it or justify it. Tell me as a scientist why you're so convinced of climate change, and then we'll move on to the rest.
Sure. In very brief, ever since this planet was formed some 4.9 billion years ago, and ever since we've had climate, it's been changing because the Earth does change. I mean, the center of the Earth is cooling down. The magnetic field is decreasing a little bit here, a little bit there. There's volcanic activity all over the place. Everybody knows about earthquakes. Well, all of that movement of tectonic plates affects the way the climate behaves. And we've had lots of warming trends and cooling trends and glaciation periods and all kinds of other things. So to say that the climate is changing really is kind of overstating the obvious. The problem with today's climate change issues is whether or not our activities on this planet are exacerbating them and making them go faster. But as far as the changes are concerned, they're occurring whether we're here or not.
But doesn't it seem... Okay, so... I just want to ask you about this because maybe I'm we human beings, in terms of the lifespan of the Earth, each of us, our individual lifetime is so infinitesimally small that you would not think that during our lifetime we would be able to observe a climate change.
You know, you're absolutely right about that. But think about what I do say in my book is that 15,000 years ago there wasn't a single farm on the planet. And now look at what we've done. I mean, not that it's good or bad, but the fact is that we've converted a lot of greenery and a lot of forest to croplands. And so that's actually been over just the last 12,000 years. Geologists blink their eyes and 12,000 years goes by. So you're absolutely right on that. We have a powerful influence on this planet in certain ways.
Yeah, we do.
Cutting down trees takes away the ability of the Earth to suck all that CO2 back up and store it in terms of cellulose. So we have been able to make some profound changes, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, it does seem as if we accelerate the demise of creatures rather quickly. I mean, really.
Here.
Yeah, we do.
Without concern or without knowledge of them, basically. It's all innocent, but it's still happening.
It's definitely happening. In fact, you're coming to Westport next week, and somebody ought to discuss with you the plans for a Y that is going up, that it's going to be about 125,000 square feet, and they're cutting down 3,000 trees instead of redeveloping and rebuilding the Y in the downtown. And you know what? It's a local issue. It's caused such a schism. They're doing it anyway. They're taking the last sort of old growth day camp. You know what I mean? And they're anyway. It's very aggravating to me because I know that a town like Westport should know better, and still they're not doing better.
Gee, I don't know if I can.
Yeah, there's nothing you can say. Let's talk about your book. It's just very aggravating to me because I'm a Westport resident. Okay, so now let's talk about vertical farming. First of all, explain what it is.
Well, it already exists on one level, okay? It's a high-tech greenhouse crop growing. So if you look around the world right now, you can find tons of examples of great greenhouses that are growing lots of crops, and people are benefiting tremendously from it because you get year-round crop production, for instance. There's no weather-related crop failures. You can screen out insect pests. You can even keep out some plant pathogens that are transmitted by insects to the plants themselves. So there's a ton of advantages, and people realize that, and they've constructed greenhouses, and they're very happy. But they're usually far away from where people live in cities, and they take up as much land as a regular farm, except that they produce it year-round. So there is those advantages. But what I'm suggesting is take the concept of a greenhouse and build a tall building out of that and move that either in cities or next to cities. And that solves a lot of other problems in terms of food miles and use of abandoned city properties, for instance. I know that I've done an extensive amount of traveling through the Connecticut region. I have a good friend that used to teach at Yale. I used to go up to see him a lot. And I identified a lot of places along the way that would be perfect for vertical farming.
It must be, when you have an idea like this, it must be so, you must be so enthusiastic to get other people on board. So, but explain to me how, if it's vertical, you think of a greenhouse being spread out because you think of sunshine coming from above. So how does a vertical skyscraper get enough sunshine, or is it all artificial light?
No, it's not. Well, it's a difficult question to answer because actually, it depends on the shape of the building. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be higher than 5 or 6 stories, as long as it's oriented towards the sun. And you can make these things rather long. Hundreds of yards long in some cases. And if you go to the Middle East, for instance, where you've got lots of land just outside cities like Dubai and Abu Dhabi, you can make them miles long if you choose to do so, and they've got as much sunlight as you can possibly use, right? So if you make them narrow and not so tall, and curve them so that the sun follows the curvature of those buildings, you can overcome a lot of need for using grow lights. But on the other hand, you can capture sunlight and use photovoltaics, for instance, to actually make grow lights work. So we've come a long way in the last, say, 5 or 10 years in terms of LED lighting and the energy that they consume. And it's getting very close to the break-even point now where you can take sunlight on photovoltaics and convert it to grow lights and get your plants to grow.
And you don't need to have windows.
You don't need to. There's a farm, for instance, out in the middle of the Arizona desert that's 318 acres of greenhouse, and they use photovoltaics mostly for generating their power. So quite amazing, actually. So
now, you talk about something. Can you explain what a hydrostacker is?
Sure. That's an easy one, but the name sort of suggests itself. If you imagine a series of grow pots, 4 per unit, and it's almost shaped like a trumpet, all right? The base of the trumpet sort of sticks into the top of the one below it, with 4 more on top of that. The pots that you hold your plants in this case strawberries, but they can do other plants like that as well, the pots all have holes in the bottom. So what you do is you start with a growing solution that's suspended above the entire apparatus at the top of all this, and you have what is absolutely a perfect analogy here to the trickle-down hypothesis.
I gotcha. And so the water that irrigates the first round of strawberry plants falls out the soil on the bottom and waters the rest.
You got it. And in fact, there's no soil. It's all done hydroponically. So,
well, what does that mean? Come on, educate a moron like myself. What does that mean? You mean there's no dirt in hydroponic? There's no dirt?
There's no dirt. There's no dirt. There are artificial substrates or natural substrates. For instance, you can take a piece of volcanic rock and crush it all up into a powder. And if you supply the nutrients in a water form to a plant that you've stuck inside of that soil, in quotes, because it's not really soil, the plant will think it's in soil and start to grow.
You're kidding
me. And the water
me.
contains... No, that's being done all the time. This is very common. They've spun it into a material called rock wool, and that's what the hydroponic greenhouses use for germinating their seeds to get them to get to the next stage. So the technologies are all in place. All we have to do is be clever about it and put them together like a set of Lego into a different form.
Well, that's what your book does. Your book actually is an examination of various experimental ideas. And what I thought was really cool is you have the Apple building, on Fifth Avenue, that beautiful glass building. So in your perfect world, what would you do with that Apple building?
Oh, my goodness. I'd make it bigger, first of all.
Okay.
And I would turn that one into a restaurant. I would love to go to that restaurant. And I would put a much bigger version of it on the outside of it, and that's where I would grow the food for the restaurant. And, I would call this restaurant Cube. And so you go in for a nice square meal, so to speak, in 3 dimensions. You can be sitting there and looking up and watching all of the farmers, so to speak, grow the crops that are going into the very salad that you're going to be eating in another 20 minutes after you've ordered it. So that's not far-fetched. That could be done tomorrow, given enough finances.
So have you approached Steve Jobs with the idea?
It's hard to get an audience with people like that.
But you never know who's listening to the show. You never know. Somebody from Apple could be listening and say, you know what? That would be a really cool thing for Apple to partner up to do.
I would agree entirely, and I would be willing to act as an almost unpaid consultant just to see this thing get done. Last year, by the way, I had the privilege of going out to California and participating in the Singularity University, which is run by Peter Diamandis. It was housed on the NASA research campus in Mountain View, California, and all the people from Google were there, and they really loved the idea about the vertical farm. So there's some traction out there, and I think that in another year or two, you're going to see some examples.
I'm very excited to see it. Before I let you go, I've got to ask you, Dr. Polmmier.
Sure.
I have a 1-acre plot, okay,
Yep.
And I have a black thumb.
Okay.
I do. I really do. I've tried, and I don't like to build real fences, and so the animals get me, and I'm lazy, and it's no good. But really, I saw you talk about the victory farms during World War II. I mean,
Sure.
as a human being, as somebody who's trying to help versus hurt the environment, what should I be doing? What should the rest of us suburbanites be doing at a minimum to improve our environment around us?
What I'd love to see happen both in densely urban centers and the surrounding suburban centers is if we could just have access to restaurant waste and compost that back into soil, which is an easy deal. You don't have to do anything. You just have to take the organic material that you collect from the restaurants and put it into a wooden box and let the worms do the rest. You would have a very good solution to one of the biggest problems we've got in urban living right now, and that is rats and cockroaches. Believe it or not, restaurant waste contributes to their diet about 90%. So if we could find another use for restaurant waste rather than feeding cockroaches and rats, we'd solve a couple of problems all at the same time.
So what you're saying is, like we have Hungry Harvest and City,
Yep.
You're saying instead of just the restaurants giving away the good stuff, they should also be giving away the other stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's my view. I would totally agree with that. And then you could use that soil for other people who are perhaps have a greener thumb than you and I. And
That's right.
Turn that into good food.
That's a really clever idea. You've got to talk about that on the library and the library in Westport on Tuesday.
There's a guy out in Wisconsin. His name is Will Allen, and he is a MacArthur winner, and he's been doing this for the last 5 years.